Wichita man who reported quality production problems at Spirit Aerosystems has died, according to his family and attorney. Rachel Hackbarth's in the newsroom with what we know tonight.
Jacob, Josh Dean died early Tuesday morning. It's after what was described as a sudden illness. His death was first reported in the Seattle Times. His aunt said it was after he developed breathing issues that turned into a serious bacterial infection. Dean worked at Spirit from 2019 until April 2023 when he was fired, temporarily laid off during COVID-19 production shutdowns. Dean reported misdrilled bulkhead holes to multiple people in October 2022, about a year before the issue was made public. One of his attorneys in a statement says Josh's passing is a loss to the aviation community and the flying public. He possessed tremendous courage to stand up for what he felt was true and right and raise quality and safety issues. In December, a lawsuit was filed by Spirit Aerosystems shareholders against the company for not telling investors about quality issues. Dean provided a deposition in that suit, though he was not a plaintiff. Lane?